The night of the Hollywood charity gala began with golden lights, laughter, and the sound of cameras flashing. Everyone who entered the grand ballroom wore pride like an invisible crown. Banners of the event theme, icons of humanity, hung from the ceiling. It was a night meant to celebrate compassion, but most people had come for the glamour. Among the shimmering crowd walked two people whose paths had crossed many times before, though their hearts still carried a quiet distance. One was Sandra Bullock, radiant yet calm. The other was Keanu Reeves, humble and silent as ever. No one knew what was about to unfold that evening, or how it would change every heart in the room. The story began long before the lights turned on that night. Years earlier, Keanu and Sandra had shared laughter and friendship on many film sets. They were known for their respect toward everyone, from directors to the youngest assistants. But after one film project ended suddenly due to a tragic accident on set, a wave of guilt and silence grew between them. The press wrote stories, some cruel, some false, and though neither ever blamed the other, they stopped talking. Time passed. Both continued their work, their kindness, and their quiet way of living. But the friendship that once felt warm slowly faded into distance. Tonight's event was meant to honor those who had changed lives through generosity. The audience included stars, producers, and unknown heroes who had done extraordinary things. Sandra had been invited as one of the evening's top guests. She was expected to receive an award for her charity work. Keanu, however, had arrived quietly, avoiding interviews and cameras. He wore a simple black suit, his hair slightly messy, his eyes thoughtful. He greeted the staff, thanked the security guards, and chose a seat far from the front. Few noticed him at first. He liked it that way. As the music played and the hosts began their speeches, Sandra sat near the stage. Her smile was gentle but distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. She looked around the hall, her eyes scanning faces until they paused for a moment on one seat near the back. Keanu's face caught her gaze. He didn't notice at first. When their eyes finally met, the moment lasted only a few seconds, but it carried years of unspoken emotions. Forgiveness, regret, gratitude, all hidden behind polite smiles. She looked away quickly, her heartbeat steady but heavy. The first half of the event moved smoothly. Awards were given, applause filled the air, and beautiful speeches echoed about love and service. Yet under the brightness of the chandeliers, an invisible tension quietly built. Something about the evening felt different, as if it carried a secret waiting to be revealed. Sandra felt it too. Her hands trembled slightly when the host announced her name for the final award of the night. She was expected to walk up, smile, and thank everyone. But as she stood, she felt a voice inside whisper, "Not yet. There's something unfinished." She took a slow breath and stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed, and the audience cheered warmly. But before accepting the golden trophy, Sandra raised her hand gently. The hall fell silent. Her voice was calm but carried a strange emotion that instantly caught attention. "Before I accept this," she said softly, "I want to speak about someone else tonight." People looked at each other in confusion. The host froze for a moment. Sandra continued, her eyes glistening slightly under the lights. "Years ago," she said, "on a film set, something happened that changed how I see kindness. There was a moment when I was lost, broken, and afraid to continue. But someone, without saying a word, stood beside me and reminded me what humanity means." She paused. The silence in the hall grew deeper. Somewhere in the back, Keanu looked down as if trying to disappear. Sandra's tone grew more personal, her voice shaking slightly, though her words stayed gentle and steady. "I have seen many great actors," she said, "but only a few great souls. There was a man who helped others quietly, never asking for attention. He once paid the hospital bills of a crew member he barely knew. He helped a homeless man find shelter. He even funded an art school for children who lost their families, signing his letters with 2 simple initials. JK, the crowd began to whisper. Faces turned toward Keanu. He looked surprised, almost uneasy, as if he wished the moment would end. Sandra took another deep breath. "Tonight," she said softly, "this event celebrates humanity, and I believe the truest form of humanity is found in those who help without being seen." The host, unsure what to do, stood frozen beside her. The camera operators zoomed in on Keanu's face. He didn't move, but his eyes had started to glisten. Sandra continued speaking, her heart pounding. "We live in a world where kindness is often hidden behind noise," she said. "But sometimes the quietest people carry the brightest light." For a long moment, no one clapped. The silence was thick with emotion. People realized this wasn't a prepared speech. This was something real, something deeply personal. Sandra lowered her head slightly, her eyes softening as she looked toward the back of the hall again. "So, tonight," she said, "if anyone deserves the word icon of humanity, it is the man who never wanted to be called one." The spotlight, as if guided by fate, slowly moved toward Keanu. His face reflected shock, humility, and quiet pain. He didn't move at first. Everyone turned to look at him. Some whispered his name. Sandra smiled faintly through tears. "Keanu," she said softly into the microphone, "you have taught us that kindness does not need applause." Her words echoed through the hall. The audience erupted into an emotional wave of applause. Some people stood, others clapped slowly, trying to process the moment. Keanu lowered his head, hiding his eyes with his hand. For the first time in many years, Sandra's words had reached him again. The host quickly tried to regain order, but the atmosphere had changed completely. There was no glamour left, only emotion. Everyone felt it. A quiet, sacred kind of respect filled the air. Sandra stepped back from the microphone, and the spotlight faded. She placed the golden trophy on the podium and said, "This belongs to all who choose kindness over fame." Then she walked off the stage slowly. The applause continued long after she sat down. Keanu looked at her from across the room, his eyes filled with both disbelief and gratitude. Their silence spoke louder than any words ever could. A few minutes later, the host tried to continue the show, but something unexpected happened. The young event host, a teenage girl named Lily, suddenly walked toward the stage holding a small envelope in her hand. Her expression was nervous, but her steps were steady. She was one of the many orphans supported by the gala's charity program. Everyone looked at her curiously, not knowing she carried a secret that would turn the entire evening upside down. The spotlight followed her as she stood beside the microphone. Sandra looked at her with gentle concern. Keanu watched quietly, still emotional from Sandra's speech. Lily took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly, "but I think I know who JK really is." The audience went silent again. Even Sandra looked surprised. Keanu's hands froze on his lap. Lily opened the small envelope and pulled out a folded letter. Her voice quivered as she began reading. "Dear Lily, this is your scholarship renewal for next year. Keep painting. The world needs your colors. Signed, JK." She looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "That's the signature on every letter I got from my sponsor," she said. "And I just realized tonight that it means John Keanu." The room gasped. The cameras turned to Keanu again. He looked stunned, his lips trembling slightly as if words had forgotten how to form. Lily stepped closer toward the audience and continued. "The man who helped me get my education, who paid for my art classes, who believed in me when no one else did, it was him." People began to stand, clapping, cheering, crying. Sandra wiped her eyes and smiled through tears. Keanu stood slowly, his chest rising with deep emotion. For years, he had kept his acts of kindness hidden. But tonight, the truth had found its voice. As he looked toward the stage, Sandra's eyes met his again. This time, there was no distance, no guilt, no past, only understanding. She nodded gently as if to say, "It's time the world sees who you really are." And for the first time in years, Keanu smiled, not for cameras, not for applause, but for the quiet peace that comes when truth finally speaks. The night that began with fame ended with humility. And before the lights dimmed, something deep changed in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. They had seen a star cry, not from pride, but from gratitude. And they had seen a friend's words heal what silence once broke. The applause from that night echoed long after the lights went down. When the curtains closed, the world outside the ballroom seemed quieter. Reporters whispered questions. Flashes from cameras slowed, and even the sound of footsteps softened, as if everyone feared disturbing the moment that had just unfolded. Something rare had happened inside that hall. Fame had taken a back seat and kindness had taken the stage. Keanu stood near the back exit trying to breathe. His heart was still racing from what Lily had revealed. He never wanted recognition. His help was always meant to be silent. For years, he had signed letters with the initials JK to protect the dignity of those he helped. But tonight, the secret had found light. He felt exposed, yet strangely peaceful. Sandra's words had broken through the walls he had built around his quiet heart. He looked down the hallway and saw Sandra talking softly with Lily. The young girl was holding a small sketchbook close to her chest. Her eyes shone with the innocent gratitude of someone who had finally met her unknown guardian. Sandra was smiling kindly, guiding her through the sea of curious guests. Every few seconds, she glanced around, perhaps searching for him. Keanu thought of slipping away. Disappearing into the night would be easier than facing a crowd that suddenly saw him differently. But something deep inside told him to stay. He had spent years avoiding attention, thinking silence was enough. Maybe tonight? Silence needed to speak. As the hall emptied, Sandra finally found him. She walked toward him slowly, her heels tapping softly on the marble floor. The air between them felt heavy with memories. When she stopped a few steps away, neither spoke at first. Her eyes were kind, yet cautious, like someone approaching a wounded friend. "You could have told them no," he said quietly, his voice gentle. "They deserve to know," she replied. "You've carried this kindness too quietly." Keanu looked down, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes things lose meaning when spoken aloud. "And sometimes," Sandra said softly, "they find meaning when finally shared." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by echoes of laughter from the fading crowd. Then Lily approached, holding her sketchbook. She hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Keanu," she said shyly, "can I show you something?" He smiled, his tone calm. "Of course." She opened the book. Inside were pages of drawings, faces of people smiling, children holding paintbrushes, and one simple sketch of a man sitting alone under a streetlight, holding a letter with the initials JK at the bottom corner. It was her way of saying thank you. "This is what your letters made me feel," she said. "Safe, seen, and strong." Keanu blinked, holding back tears. "You didn't need to thank me," he said softly. "I did," she replied, "because your kindness didn't just help me, it helped others. We talk about you all the time in our art classes. We call you the quiet helper." His lips curved into a small smile. "The quiet helper," he repeated, his voice faint with disbelief. "That's a better title than any award." Sandra watched the exchange, her eyes glistening. For a moment, the entire night's noise faded into a stillness filled with humility. Then, from across the hall, the event director approached hurriedly, holding the golden trophy that Sandra had left on the stage. "We decided something," the director said. "From now on, this award will not be called the Humanity Tribute. It will be renamed the Quiet Light Award, in honor of those who give without seeking recognition." He looked at Keanu and smiled. "And tonight, sir, it belongs to you." The crowd nearby erupted into soft applause again. Sandra clapped quietly, her face calm but proud. Keanu looked at the trophy, then at the people around him. His voice, when he spoke, was steady but filled with deep feeling. "If I accept this," he said, "it will not be for me. It will be for every person who has ever helped another in silence. Because real kindness doesn't begin on stage. It begins in unseen places." The hall grew quiet again. Reporters lowered their cameras. The director nodded respectfully and handed him the trophy. Keanu held it for a moment, then placed it gently on a nearby table. "It belongs here," he said. "In the middle of everyone." Lily smiled. "Then it will shine for all of us," she said. Later that night, after most guests had left, Keanu and Sandra stepped outside into the cool air. The city lights shimmered across the horizon. The distant sounds of cars hummed softly, but neither spoke for a while. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "You know," she said, "you once told me that light doesn't talk. It just shines." "I think you lived that truth," he smiled faintly. "Maybe too quietly." "No," she said gently, "just long enough for someone to notice." They both laughed softly, a sound that felt healing after so many years. It was not the loud laughter of movie sets or interviews. It was the quiet kind that comes from peace returning to the heart. As they stood near the steps of the hall, a young journalist approached hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "can I ask one question?" He nodded politely. "Why did you choose to stay anonymous all these years?" she asked. Keanu thought for a long moment before replying. "Because," he said slowly, "when no one knows your name, you learn the truth of giving. The act itself becomes the reward." The journalist lowered her microphone slowly. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "It's simple," he replied. "Kindness is never about who gives. It's about who receives hope." Sandra looked at him quietly, realizing that the same man she had admired years ago had grown even deeper in his silence. She felt proud but also humbled. There was something sacred about being witness to goodness that expected nothing in return. As they prepared to leave, Lily ran up again, out of breath. "Wait," she said, handing Keanu a small envelope. "This is from my friends at the orphanage. We all wrote messages for you." Keanu smiled and took it gently. "Thank you," he said. "I'll keep it safe." When they opened the car door, Sandra glanced at the envelope and said softly, "You know, you'll never be just silent again. The world will talk about you." He shook his head with a kind smile. "That's fine," he said, "as long as they talk about kindness, too." The car drove off through the city streets, but the night was far from over. Far away, people who had watched the event on television were already sharing clips of Sandra's speech and Lily's revelation. Hashtags filled the internet. Quiet light, a kindness first, a Keanu kindness. But Keanu never opened his phone to see them. He sat quietly, watching the lights blur past the window, lost in thought. He wasn't thinking about fame or applause. He was thinking about a small letter written long ago to a child he never expected to meet. And now, she had stood on stage, proving that every unseen act of kindness eventually finds its way back. Sandra looked at him from the other seat. "You look peaceful," she said. He nodded. "Maybe because tonight showed that even silence has a voice." When they reached the hotel, they stepped out together. The air smelled of rain, though the sky was still clear. Before going inside, Sandra turned to him. "There's one more thing you should know," she said softly. "That orphanage you helped, it's not just for children. They also teach art to retired crew members who lost their jobs. Your help rebuilt more lives than you can imagine." His eyes widened slightly. "I didn't know that." "You were never supposed to," she said with a smile. "But maybe it's time you visit them." He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow." And for the first time in years, Sandra saw something in his expression she had missed. The spark of quiet purpose. The kind that doesn't fade with applause. That night, as he lay in bed, Keanu reread Lily's letter again and again. The words were simple but powerful. "Thank you for seeing us even when the world didn't." He placed the letter on his bedside table, beside a flickering lamp. The glow reflected in his eyes as he whispered to himself, "Maybe kindness really does travel in circles." Outside, the streets of Hollywood buzzed with headlines and interviews. But in that small moment of stillness, only one truth mattered. That genuine compassion, once released into the world, never disappears. It always finds its way home. And what awaited Keanu the next morning would prove that fate listens to every act of goodness, no matter how silent. The next morning arrived quietly. The golden sunlight crept through the hotel window and fell softly across Keanu's desk, where the small envelope from Lily still rested. He hadn't slept much. The weight of the previous night's emotions kept his mind awake, playing each moment again and again, the speech, the applause, the tears, and the letter signed by J.K. that no longer belonged to secrecy. He sat in silence, sipping black coffee, thinking about Sandra's words from the night before. Maybe it's time you visit them. It had been years since he had personally visited any of the places he had helped. He always believed kindness should remain invisible. That distance protected purity. But now, after everything that happened, he felt something new, a calling to reconnect, not for recognition, but for gratitude. After breakfast, he called Sandra. She answered with a calm, almost knowing tone. "You're going, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "But I'd like you to come with me." There was a pause, and then her voice softened. I was hoping you'd say that. By noon, their car drove out of the city, away from the glass towers of Hollywood toward the quiet hills where the orphanage stood. It was called Hope Haven, a place built not just with bricks but with faith. The long driveway was lined with trees, and the laughter of children echoed faintly in the distance. The gatekeeper greeted them warmly, unaware at first who they were. As they stepped out, a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and blooming flowers. Murals of colorful hearts, stars, and children holding hands covered the walls. Sandra looked around with admiration. "You helped build this," she whispered. Keanu shook his head. "They built it. I just gave them a chance." A young woman approached them, holding a clipboard and wearing a paint-stained apron. She looked surprised when she recognized them. "Are you Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock?" she asked, half in disbelief. Sandra smiled kindly. "We came to visit the art school," she said. The woman's eyes widened. "Please come in. The children would love to meet you. You have no idea what your support means here." As they walked through the small classrooms, they saw children painting, sculpting, and learning music. Their laughter filled every corner. There were no expensive tools, just colors, brushes, and joy. Each wall carried a story. One had a painting of a man handing a book to a child. Under it were written the words, "The Silent Giver." Keanu stopped to read it. His expression softened. "The Silent Giver," he murmured. Sandra looked at him. "Seems like the world already knew," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "They knew the spirit, not the name. That's what matters." The young teacher led them to a small garden behind the main hall. There, older volunteers were teaching retired technicians and former film crew members how to paint. One elderly man with a shaky hand was painting a sunrise, his eyes full of emotion. The teacher leaned close and whispered, "He used to work in lighting for film sets until an accident left him unable to continue. This place gave him purpose again." Keanu crouched beside the man and smiled. "That's beautiful," he said softly. The man looked up, unaware of who he was. "Thank you," he replied. "A stranger once funded this class. I never met him, but I always wanted to say thank you." Keanu's heart tightened. "I think he already feels your gratitude," he said quietly. Sandra watched the moment with tears in her eyes. There was something sacred in watching kindness come full circle, especially when the giver and receiver didn't even recognize each other. After some time, the head of the orphanage invited them to the main hall. Framed photographs lined the walls, smiling children, happy families, and volunteers. One frame caught Sandra's attention. It was a photograph of a small group holding a banner that read, "Thank you, J.K." She touched the frame gently. "They kept your name," she said softly. Keanu replied, "It's not a name anymore. It's a promise." As they sat with the staff, stories began to unfold. One teacher explained how the donation had arrived at a time when the center was about to close. Another described how they started the Quiet Light Initiative, a weekly event where children share acts of kindness done in secret, inspired by J.K.'s story. The more they heard, the more they realized that a single act of compassion had grown into a movement. When the children gathered to meet them, Lily stood at the front, beaming with excitement. "We didn't think you'd really come," she said. Keanu smiled warmly. "I didn't think I'd ever be invited." The room erupted in laughter. The children surrounded them, showing their art pieces, poems, and handmade cards. One little boy handed Keanu a small clay sculpture of two hands holding a light. "This is for you," he said shyly. "It's called Hope That Never Ends." Keanu knelt down and accepted it gently. "This is the best award I've ever received," he said with emotion. Sandra smiled, wiping a tear discreetly. Then Lily took the microphone. "We want to show you something," she said. The lights dimmed, and a short video began to play on the projector. It showed clips of the children's journey, studying, painting, rebuilding classrooms after storms, helping new students. At the end, the screen faded to black and white text appeared. "Dedicated to the one who taught us that kindness can live without a name." The audience stood and applauded. Even the staff clapped with wet eyes. Keanu sat quietly, overwhelmed. Sandra touched his hand and whispered, "You see now?" It was never just about one letter. It was about every life that letter touched. He nodded, unable to speak. His eyes glistened, reflecting the screen's soft light. For a man who had given so much without seeking praise, seeing the impact so alive before him was almost too much to bear. He stood and walked slowly to the stage. Everyone fell silent. He looked around the room, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I don't deserve this," he began. "Everything you've built here, everything you've created. It was your strength, your hope, not mine. I only gave a small drop, but you turned it into an ocean." The children listened closely. "You don't need to be rich or famous to change the world," he continued. "You just need to care enough to start." Sandra smiled, proud but deeply moved. Lily wiped her tears and whispered, "That's what you taught us." Keanu knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "Then promise me something," he said. "Teach someone else the same." She nodded, holding back tears. "I will." After the event, as the sun began to set over the hills, Keanu and Sandra walked through the garden one last time. Birds sang softly in the distance. The orange glow of evening painted the sky with quiet beauty. "You know," Sandra said, "tonight you gave them something they'll never forget." "They gave me something too," he replied. "What's that?" "Faith," he said. "Faith that kindness doesn't fade. It multiplies." They stopped by a bench near the gate. Keanu took out his phone for the first time that day. Hundreds of messages filled the screen. News headlines, praise, invitations. But he didn't open any of them. Instead, he opened a note app and typed only 4 words. "Keep giving in silence." He looked at Sandra and smiled. "The world will always talk," he said, "but kindness speaks quieter and louder." As they drove away from the orphanage, the lights behind them shimmered like small stars. What they didn't know was that one of those lights came from a camera still recording, a local news team that had captured their entire visit. By morning, the footage would spread everywhere. But hidden inside that story was one last secret that even Keanu didn't know yet. The head of the orphanage had one more letter waiting for him. A letter from someone who had watched his kindness from afar for years. And that letter would change everything he believed about his own past. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the quiet hills. Birds sang outside the hotel window while Keanu and Sandra shared breakfast in silence. The visit to the orphanage still lingered in their hearts. The laughter of the children, the stories of hope, the faces that shone with gratitude. It all felt unreal. Yet something deeper was waiting, something they didn't know had already begun to unfold. A soft knock broke the calm. When Keanu opened the door, the head of the orphanage stood there, holding a simple brown envelope. "This arrived last night," she said. "It was addressed to you. We've had it for years but never knew where to send it." Keanu looked at her, puzzled. "Years?" She nodded. "It was left by the original founder of our first art program before she passed away." After she left, Keanu sat by the window and carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside was old but neatly folded. As he unfolded it, the handwriting felt strangely familiar. Elegant, steady, and warm. "Dear J.K., you do not know me, but I know what you have done. You helped me once when I was young and lost, when a stranger's kindness paid for my first art supplies. I built this orphanage because I wanted that kindness to continue. I never learned your name, but I always remembered your light. If this letter reaches you someday, know that your single act has built hundreds more. Signed, Grace McCallan." Sandra leaned over his shoulder, reading silently. Her eyes widened. "Grace McCallan?" she whispered. "She founded Hope Haven. She passed away years ago." Keanu held the letter tightly, his throat tightening. "She was the first person I ever helped," he said quietly. "I was just a struggling actor back then. She never knew it was me." They sat in silence, both realizing the full circle that had just closed. The woman he once helped had built the very place he later supported. Kindness had traveled through time, linking strangers across decades. Sandra spoke softly. "So the man who gave hope once received it first." Keanu smiled faintly, tears glimmering in his eyes. "Maybe that's how kindness survives," he said. "It just keeps passing from one heart to another." Outside, the sunlight brightened through the window, falling over the letter as if blessing it. The moment felt sacred, quiet, and complete. Sandra looked at him gently. You see, Keanu, sometimes fate waits until we're ready to understand the meaning of our own kindness. He nodded slowly. And maybe, he said softly, that's why something unexpected had to happen last night. It wasn't just about being seen. It was about remembering where it all began. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. I think I finally understand, he said. Understand what? Sandra asked. That no act of kindness ever ends. It just waits for its next chapter. By the next morning, the story of the gala and the orphanage visit had spread across the world. News anchors called it the night Hollywood cried. Social media was flooded with clips of Sandra's speech, Lily's letter, and Keanu's humble words. People everywhere wrote about kindness, calling it the new light. For once, fame wasn't about glamour. It was about grace. Keanu woke early to the sound of messages buzzing on his phone. He ignored most of them, but one caught his attention. It was from the event director of the gala. We want to dedicate next year's ceremony to the Quiet Light Initiative. Please say yes. He smiled faintly and put the phone down. He didn't want another spotlight. He only wanted peace. Sandra knocked on his door a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. She wore a simple gray sweater, her smile gentle. You're trending again, she said lightly. For once, I don't mind, he replied. She laughed softly. The world needed this. It's like everyone finally remembered what kindness looks like. They sat by the window watching the city wake up. Reporters waited outside the hotel, but neither of them went out. For the first time in a long while, they had nothing to promote. Nothing to perform, just a quiet sense of gratitude. You know, Sandra said, Grace's letter still feels like destiny. Maybe it was, he replied. Maybe the universe keeps connecting hearts until we listen. A few hours later, the orphanage called. Lily wanted to invite them to a small community event that evening. It wasn't glamorous, just children, teachers, and a few volunteers painting a mural of kindness on a wall. They agreed instantly. When they arrived, the sun was setting. Dozens of hands, old and young, were painting together, creating a giant mural that showed 2 figures passing a small light to each other. Underneath it were written the words, "Kindness never ends." Lily ran up to them excitedly. Look, we're painting the story of how it started, she said. The quiet helper, the teacher, and the children. Keanu knelt beside her. You're missing one part, he said. What? She asked, curiously. The part where kindness goes back to the one who gave it. Lily smiled and added a final small circle of light, connecting both hands. Now it's complete, she said proudly. Sandra stepped closer, taking in the image. This, she said softly, is what people should see instead of red carpets. As night fell, candles were lit around the mural. One by one, everyone placed a candle at the base, each flame reflecting in the fresh paint. The soft glow turned the wall into something alive, something sacred. A journalist approached quietly, holding a microphone. Mr. Reeves, she asked, after everything that's happened, what would you say to the world tonight? Keanu looked at the wall for a long time before answering. His voice was low but clear. I'd say this, be kind when no one's watching. That's when it matters most. The crowd grew silent. Even the smallest children seemed to understand. Sandra whispered, You've given them something no award ever could. He smiled softly. They gave it to me first. As the candles flickered, a small breeze passed through the crowd. For a moment, all the lights shimmered together, forming one bright glow that stretched across the mural. It felt as if the universe itself had joined in the promise of kindness. In the distance, church bells rang softly, marking the hour. Sandra looked at the mural, then at Keanu, and said, Maybe this is the real Hollywood moment. He nodded, and the only one worth remembering. When they left that night, neither of them spoke much. Words weren't needed anymore. Their silence carried everything. The respect, the memories, the gratitude, and the quiet power of a kindness that had finally found its way home. The days that followed were calm, but filled with meaning. The world kept talking about the gala, the orphanage, and the mural of kindness. Yet Keanu and Sandra stayed quiet. They refused new interviews, ignored glamorous invitations, and spent their time visiting simple places, community centers, shelters, schools, places that reminded them of what truly mattered. One evening, a small ceremony was held at Hope Haven. The children wanted to honor the people who inspired them to start their own Circle of Light project, a program that would fund education for underprivileged kids using donations from around the world. Every child would pledge to help another child when they grew up. The idea spread faster than anyone expected. When Keanu and Sandra arrived, they were greeted with cheers. Lily stood on stage holding a small box wrapped in golden ribbon. "This," she said, "is not an award. It's a promise." She opened the box and revealed a key made of silver. "This key," she continued, "belongs to the new art studio we built. We named it the Quiet Light Room. It will always stay open to anyone who wishes to learn, no matter who they are." Keanu stepped forward slowly, deeply moved. "Thank you," he said softly. "But remember, this was never about me. It was about what kindness makes us become." Lily smiled. "It made us believe again." The crowd clapped gently. Sandra wiped her eyes as she watched him place the key back into Lily's hands. "You should keep it," he said. "You're the future of this kindness." She nodded, holding it to her heart. After the event, the children began to sing a simple song they had written. The lyrics spoke of light, courage, and hearts that give even when unseen. Their voices filled the hall with warmth. Keanu and Sandra stood among them, their faces glowing in the candlelight. Later that night, as everyone went home, the two of them sat under a tree near the orphanage garden. The same breeze that had once carried Lily's laughter now moved softly through the leaves. Sandra broke the silence first. "You know," she said gently, "this all started because you didn't want anyone to know." He smiled faintly. "Maybe some stories need to stay hidden until they find their ending." "And do you think this is the ending?" she asked. He looked toward the mural glowing faintly in the distance. "No," he said, "it's a beginning. Kindness never ends, it just changes hands." Sandra nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "Then maybe the next hands will paint even brighter lights." "They already are," he said quietly. As the moon rose higher, Keanu pulled the old letter from his jacket pocket, the one from Grace McCallan. He read it again under the silver glow of night. Then he folded it carefully and handed it to Sandra. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs to everyone now," she smiled softly. "And what about you?" "I already have my reminder," he said, looking toward the children's dormitory where laughter still echoed faintly. "It's in every heart that keeps believing." A few weeks later, the mural of kindness became a symbol across the world. People from different countries began painting their own versions. Walls, schools, hospitals, all with the same message. Kindness never ends. Journalists called it the Quiet Light Movement. Celebrities joined it, not with grand speeches, but through small, silent acts of generosity. One morning, Sandra received a letter in the mail. It was written in neat handwriting and signed simply, "A friend who learned from your light." Inside was a photograph of a new orphanage opening in another country, built by former students of Hope Haven. At the entrance, a small plaque read, "Inspired by the kindness of J.K." She showed it to Keanu during a quiet afternoon walk. He looked at the picture and smiled. "Looks like the story keeps writing itself," he said. "And it's being told in every language," she added. They stood there in silence for a while, listening to the wind moving through the trees. The world was louder than ever, yet at that moment, everything felt still. The same quietness that had once defined Keanu's kindness now lived in countless others. As they walked back toward the car, Sandra turned and looked at him one last time. "If someone asked me what the greatest story of Hollywood was," she said softly, "I'd tell them it wasn't a film. It was what you did when no one was watching." Keanu smiled gently. "Then promise me you'll add this," he said. "It was never just me. It was all of us who believed kindness still matters." They drove away as the sun began to rise, its golden rays reflecting off the mural behind them. In that light, The painted hands holding the circle of brightness looked alive, as if glowing with every unseen good deed ever done. And so, the story that began with silence ended with unity. Not in fame, not in noise, but in the quiet truth that real kindness never needs recognition. It only needs to be shared, because one night something unexpected happened at a Hollywood event. And that one night reminded the world that kindness is the greatest role any of us can play.